Hey, Sleepy Sheepy here. Today I wanted to look at an invasion that I felt was kind of a good microcosm of some of the frustrations that I think people have had after patch 1.07. And don't get me wrong, I think patch 1.07 was really great in a lot of ways. I think the separation of damage for PvP and PvE is an extremely welcome change and just means that PvE is going to be shielded from a lot of the fine tuning that we'd like to see in PvP in the future. And the poise breakpoints, I think, are for the most part very strong and a great change. I think that the Ashes of War that got buffed, as well as the general damage scaling that got reduced, was fantastic. But I think part of this is the buff to magic that we saw and the lower FP consumption that we just kind of have continued to have for magic in general. So this is going to be an 8.5 minute invasion, and throughout the duration we're going to see nearly continuous magic spam, and especially for an invader who doesn't want to kill the host immediately, and obviously that's a preference, but you're not always going to have the option to go for the mage, especially if they're getting good cover from their phantoms. And you may be in a situation like this area where there's very little cover from magic spam. You're in a relatively flat area. There's not lots of changes in terrain that would give you options to hide from the magic. And especially if you have a group of people that are playing somewhat passively or playing near their mage, it's very difficult, I would say, to kind of negotiate this play style from the mage that you're going to see, where your ability to kind of punish them is going to be somewhat limited, and their ability to just kind of send stuff your way with almost no punishment in terms of FP consumption or anything is, very strong. So they can essentially spam magic the entire time, and if they have decently high FP, then there's really no punishment for it. They don't need to really change anything up, and they're kind of rewarded for a somewhat low skill approach, even if you have a pretty high skill approach. So some other things I'll mention about this invasion is that I am sticking to the Great Spear class. I'm using just a single Great Spear, which is a great weapon, but it's not super overpowered. I would say it's fairly balanced. If you're just using one, the range is good, the damage is good, but you're kind of trading that for some higher recovery frames. And the Ash of War on this weapon in particular has the potential to do quite a bit of damage, but it's decently telegraphable, and you need a fair amount of time to get it charged, which gives it range. So I would say overall a pretty balanced weapon versus just three opponents, none of which are overly skilled. Some of them have pretty low damage output, but because there's continuous magic attack coming my way, I need to really slow play this. I need to avoid pretty much everything that comes from the mage, and if I don't, or if I try to trade into an attack with one of the phantoms, I'm going to lose a fair amount of HP, close to a quarter in some cases, depending on what spell they're using. And I also need to kind of continuously run. So I think that this is kind of a frustration that a lot of invaders might have felt after patch 1.07, where the idea is kind of to lower the potential for burst damage. And I don't think that's an issue to lower the potential for burst damage. I think it makes sense. I think people don't really want to get one shot, but I think the potential to blender as a 3v1 is much higher now. And I think that's kind of the crux of the issue, is if you have somebody that's kind of spamming magic, and then if you have people, especially with fast weapons, like we've seen the dual-handed thrusting sword weapon class just be kind of ridiculous. And I think G9 has put out a video recently just kind of talking about why that's a bit too strong right now. So if you have magic and somebody with a thrusting sword that they're two-handing, and you don't have something that's borderline overpowered, you're gonna have a pretty difficult time, I would say. You're gonna want to revert to using burst damage, and you may have access to that, with something like Flaming Strike, which comes out quickly and does a lot of damage, but I don't think you should really need to rely on something like that. I think it would be kind of ideal for Elden Ring moving forward to have every weapon be somewhat viable and no kind of go-tos that you need to just counter general imbalances throughout the game. So I would say some adjustments I'd like to see would involve just a higher FP consumption for magic in general, or maybe some sort of limits on the amount of FP you can have, because when a host at level 80-ish can send magic your way for close to 8.5 minutes, it feels like there's an issue. And I don't think the playstyle that I employ in this is perfect. There's potentially openings that I missed where I could have killed my opponents more quickly, and getting it down to a 2v1 rather than a 3v1 is great, and it's much more easy to handle. But I think we like long invasions as a community most of the time, but long invasions that feel like this, where you're running and rolling for every single spell that just keeps coming, doesn't really feel good. And I think the setup that I have right now and the approach that I'm taking right now is closer to Dark Souls 3. It's trying to take the advantage that I can with spacing and timing and look for openings and just kind of chip my opponents gradually. And I think we like that as a community. Definitely correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think when you can kind of trade and kind of showcase your skill especially with melee weapons, and outplay your opponent gradually, it feels good. It's a good success, and it also just kind of provides you the opportunity to get better, both you and your opponent, in terms of the mechanics of the game. So I think here this invasion is just one of the reasons why people might not like 1.07 compared to the burst damage that was available before. And I feel like I understand the complaints a little bit better after this invasion. It really just kind of showed me that the amount of FP that a host can have, and just kind of the amount of running that you might need to do, just isn't showcasing what's great about this game. And I think this game has so much amazing potential. I would just like to see that kind of realized in balances in the future. So eventually I am able to get the Phantom down and then the blue afterwards. And the reason I was able to get rid of the blue, I would say, is because I stopped getting so much magic spam my way. I'm not sure what the host was doing, but they seemed to kind of stop attacking me. So once it was a one-on-one situation with the blue, it wasn't so bad by any means. But it's not like the host was out of FP. You can kind of see that here. They're not wanting for access to spells. And I just think, I was happy to win this invasion, but it didn't necessarily feel good. And I think 8.5 minute invasions should feel good. Like, they should feel like a big success.